too.
Hey, welcome back to Sea Cruise Sports. We've taken a few weeks off here and there, and just wanted to get back into it by talking about the Big Ten and the college football playoff. So I've got Jordan with me today. Good to have you here.
Yeah, glad to be back. It's been a while, but conference championship week is already here, which is sort of depressing because it feels like we wait so long
Yep.
for the season to start. It is technically, mathematically, I believe it is the longest off season of any sport. So
Between games, for
yeah,
sure.
so for sure. Now the 12-team playoff does help with that,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's still a long off season and it goes by so quickly. So
So we're going to get into the Big Ten and talk about the playoff after that. It's kind of mixed, to be honest with you. So in the Big Ten, we have one, two, three teams. Possibly. So we've got Oregon at number one. And I mean, hats off to the Big Ten for dominating the SEC this year, for dominating the number one spot for so many weeks. Once Oregon beat Ohio State, it was clear that the Big Ten was better. And then for one and two to be a thing for a while, I thought that was a big deal.
yeah, well, I didn't like that it had to end the way it did. For
But
it to
not
not
but
be that way, but
right, because but see, Penn State is third, so Big Ten owns one and three, and then five. So out of the top five, we've got three Big Ten teams. I feel really good about that.
I mean, yeah, if you're just looking at it from a macro Big Ten perspective, but
Well, one and
Ohio
six,
State's
one and six.
yeah, but the thing is, they didn't add any more teams to the conversation though. It's still the same four
Correct.
teams in the
Just
conversation. So I
just
mean,
going back and forth. Yeah.
yeah,
So the big news to me in the Big Ten is that Oregon's undefeated. At the beginning of the season, I had predicted that Ohio State would go 12-0, pounce every team they played because I believe they were due. Um, it obviously did not happen. And one of the things I wanted to talk about was the Michigan game. It's clear to me that two things are of utmost importance in regards to the game of college football or just sports in general. The Steelers and the Browns, when the Steelers, let's say the Steelers are number one in the AFC, they play the Browns, who might have been 2-10 at the time. The Browns would always play them really close, and that's a rivalry. Cleveland and Pittsburgh have had a rivalry for many years. The Cardinals and the Cubs. If the Cubs are in the bottom and the Cardinals are in first, that series comes around. The Cubs might win all four. Just Yankees, Red Sox, you name it, right? Cowboys, Eagles. Uh, what is it about the Ohio State and Michigan rivalry that no matter where a team's at, Michigan was terrible this year. It's the worst I've seen them in a long time. It reminds me of the Lloyd Carr era or Rich Rodriguez era where they were just absolutely. What is it about Ohio State? They can't get over that hump.
well, I think I'll lead with a stat. There's a stat out there, and you can give as much credence to this as you want, but coaches who have coached at Ohio State that were born in Ohio, their record against Michigan is something like I don't know, like 38 and 28 or something. And then every coach that has coached at Ohio State that wasn't born in Ohio has a losing record by a lot. You
Really,
remember the John
really,
Cooper era?
yeah.
What Ryan Day has turned into is
The
our
Cooper
is
era.
our new
Ugh.
version of John Cooper,
Oh,
where and here's the thing. This is why I always as Michigan owns Ohio State right now, okay?
they do.
That's clear and obvious. But in terms of like which program, if you're just looking at it from a macro perspective, which is the more elite program, it's clearly Ohio State. And I'll tell you the reason why. Because right now is probably the lowest point Ohio State has had really ever since, the end of the Tressel era, right? When he got fired and the next season they had an interim coach. Half the roster wasn't
Right.
there. They go 6-6, whatever, right?
I remember that.
This is our low point, and we're 10-2 and we're ranked 6th in the country. Like this is considered Ohio State's low point,
Yeah, I mean,
right? And then you look at Michigan's low point. I mean, they went 7-5 this year, right? In the Rich Rod era, they went 3-9 one year. Like their lows are way lower than ours. But with that being said, and the same was to be said in the John Cooper era. Those teams were at the end of the season, 10-1, 11-0, but they couldn't figure out the Michigan problem. And I just think this game, like many other rivalries in the sport, comes down to which team hates the other more.
right.
Which team is builds up to this game more. And it's not to say that Ryan Day doesn't obviously want to beat Michigan. Obviously he does. He
Of
wants to win
course, of
every
course,
game.
of course.
The problem is he is just not, he doesn't have that sort of psycho, and I say this literally, this sort of psychotic hatred for Michigan like Urban Meyer had, like Jim Tressel had,
Well,
like Woody Hayes had, right? I mean, remember Jim Tressel's opening press conference? I'll never forget this because it gives me chills every time I listen to it. He said something like, you're going to be proud of our kids in the classroom and on the field, but most importantly, in 100 and something days in Ann Arbor, Michigan, when we beat the Wolf. Like, it's certain
yeah,
guys who coach, especially at Ohio State, is just ingrained in them to care about this game more than any other. And no matter how good or bad the team is, they're going to win because of that mentality. And I think it's flipped now to where Jim Harbaugh hated Ohio State more than Ryan Day hated Michigan, and they've still kind of got that Harbaugh stank on
that's
them,
a
if you
good point.
will.
Yeah,
And that Harbaugh culture is still there of like we hate them and we own them. We know we're gonna beat them regardless.
yeah. Well, in a rivalry, you have to be at your best the entire time. It was very clear early on as we were watching the game that we noticed that Ohio State was not the same team. And that
Yeah.
happens sometimes when you put a team under immense pressure. So, hats off to Michigan for absolutely ruining Ohio State's regular season. They absolutely did. They crushed the hearts of the Buckeye fans. And truthfully, I'm not a Michigan fan at all. I'm not an Ohio State fan either. But I will say that if I was a Michigan fan and I had a 6-5 season, I was down in the dumps coming off of a natty, and this happened. If you were to tell me, yeah, you're going to be bad throughout the year, but you will beat Ohio State, this is the
Yeah.
second best thing for the
100%.
Wolverines, and it will do something to their fan base to be able to talk smack against the Buckeyes, and that's really all you're looking for as a fan, I would think.
Yeah.
So, with that said, Ohio State moves down from 2 to 6. Now, I believe that losing to a team like Michigan as your last game of the year would plummet you further, but unfortunately it didn't. And I say unfortunately because if they would have put Ohio State down further, teams like Notre Dame should be down further also. I guess my thing is right now in the college football playoffs, you've got a Penn State whose only loss was to Ohio State, and they're ranked number 3. That's fucking ridiculous. I think that Penn State losing to Ohio State is a big deal, but Ohio State beat them, and with one loss, they should be as close to them as possible. They put Georgia and Notre Dame above Ohio State. So either, this is what I'm saying, either Ohio State needs to be right there with Penn State next to them, or Ohio State needs to be gone and Penn State needs to be lowered. At the same time, right, you have Penn State who did they play? Who has Notre Dame played?
Nobody. Nobody. Literally nobody.
So you've got to. I believe I would say Georgia probably has the best resume when it comes to uh, they are where they are. I never thought that a 10-2 Georgia would be ranked fifth at the end of the season without going to the championship. What is going on
Yeah.
in the playoff?
Well, they are ranked fifth.
I know, but I mean, what is going on? You've got
It's
like
just more this year than ever, and I think they couldn't have. Well, I think one of the main reasons they did the 12-team playoff, and maybe they weren't thinking of this whenever they switched to it, but because of NIL, because of the transfer portal. I mean, it's such a cliche way to
I,
start a
I I
sentence, but
think they knew
it's
about that.
such
I
reality.
did. I did. I think they knew about that, and that was part of the reason they went to it. To be honest with you.
Because of this, the talent in the sport is spread out more than it ever has been. Instead of all the good players being on 5 or 6 teams, now it's so spread out now, where we've had so much parity in the sport this year, more than we ever have. And so, again, one of the reasons Ohio State didn't drop that far is because no other team really deserves it, because every other team has major flaws, really bad losses too. So,
You trying to
I mean,
say?
again,
Well, let me ask you this: the loss to Northern Illinois early in the
yeah,
season was a lucky loss. I wouldn't. When they lost to Northern Illinois, I thought, oh, they're not going to go undefeated from here on out, and they did. You know, they beat USC pretty handily. So I mean, props to them because USC is a decent team. I'll also say, well, I mean, they're not they're better than NIU. Okay, and
sure.
they've played a few other teams that have been in the mix. But the bottom line is Notre Dame, after the loss to Northern Illinois, they should have lost a couple other games, but they didn't. They pulled it. They got it together. Um, but we see teams like, and here's the bomb, right, that I'm going to drop:
Okay.
Oregon and Texas at number one and number two. Did you know that if it wasn't for the conference change, we would have a Pac 12 and a Big 12 at number one and number two? How crazy is that?
Yeah.
And you've got SMU in the mix, and they're not
Yeah.
even Big Ten or SEC. So
No,
no,
were
I'm
they
saying
American
now,
last year?
yeah,
Is that
yeah,
what
but
they
I'm
were?
I'm saying now they're ACC. So
Yeah.
you've got you've got in my mind, a lot of people are saying that this is a negative against the committee, but to me it's a positive because it proves that teams were that good when they were there. I mean, literally, what changed in Oregon's organization between last year and this year? Absolutely nothing. Mr. Lanning,
No.
I mean, those people have been there for a very long time. They're doing the same damn thing, and they moved from what we considered the worst Power Four to either number one or number two best big conference in college football, and they won the fucking thing. So, well, not yet, but I mean they're undefeated. So
They
here,
went undefeated. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
in the entire season, not just the conference, but they won.
Now, granted, look at like the top 4 teams in the Big Ten standings, right? You've got Penn State, Oregon, Ohio State, and then who's the fourth?
Indiana.
I can't think of the fourth. Indiana, right? They only had to play one of those
That's
teams.
the dark horse.
They only had to play one of those teams.
That's
Ohio
true.
State had to
That's true.
play
That's true.
the all 3 of the other teams in there. So I mean, who knows if Oregon would have played Penn State in the regular season, would they be undefeated? But yeah, it is
Well, they
really
be
interesting that
yeah, and you can't say you. One thing about football is you only play one game a week, so it's not like basketball where you can play a team twice and you know. But I
and
think
that's a little of the criticism that I would levy though towards teams like, and I think we're just gonna. I think this is kind of just unfortunately this is how it's gonna be for foreseeable future.
it
You look
is.
at
It
Oregon
is.
and Texas, their schedule, they really only had one big. Both of them really only had one big game in hindsight, right? Like
Yeah.
Texas, we thought the Michigan game was going to be a big deal. Well, clearly Michigan was not that good this year. Um, they went in there and crushed them, right? And then Michigan ended up losing to
Maybe that
Washington
was
and a bunch
Michigan's
of other
downfall. Yeah.
yeah, a bunch of other mediocre teams, right? So Texas's only big game was Georgia, and they lost. Oregon's big game was Ohio State, and they won it by 1 point in a game that the entire nation thinks Ohio State should have won. So either way, like both of those teams benefited from
Well,
not having to play the other great teams in their conference, like outside of one, right? So it would be interesting to see what would have happened if they had a harder schedule. But I mean, you play who you play, and they, unlike the other teams in the rest of the country this year, they didn't lose to a mediocre squad. I mean, you look at every other team in the
that's
country;
true. That
they
that's
lost
that's a
to a
very
team
good
that's pretty
point.
mediocre.
Yeah.
It's about surviving and advancing, really, at this point.
Yeah, I think it's also about record, and it always has been about
Yeah.
record. I mean, you can't really the
Well,
the
that's why. Penn State and Notre Dame are ranked where they are because neither of those teams has a great win. Like neither of them have beaten any great teams. Like Penn State's best win is what, Illinois at home, and Illinois is
Right.
ranked what, 20th. Like they're
Yeah, I
not
mean
great.
it was a top 25 win at the time, and it still would be today. So Illinois at
Yeah.
9-3 or I think Illinois is 9-3, but they
Hmm.
the bottom line is they lost games, and I guess they kind of got the short end of the stick. But you look at
Yeah.
Alabama. So Alabama at 9-3. I don't think that people are giving them credit. Most of the country does not like Alabama. Only Alabama likes Alabama. It's just like Ohio State, any blue blood ish team. You either love them or you hate them. So Alabama, do they deserve to be number 11? There's definitely reasons that you could say no.
Yeah.
However,
A lot.
however, their resume, if you look at their resume, it's much like Ohio State. They had to play the tough teams, okay? And they beat some of the tough teams, but they lost to the ones that didn't matter. Who loses to, like for instance, Georgia? Who loses to Vanderbilt, right? Alabama lost. And when Vanderbilt wins, is it the same as NIU beating Notre Dame? I think it is.
Similar.
Yeah. So you can't. My point is that if Alabama goes into Vanderbilt and loses, right? You can't say that that is a worse or better loss than Notre Dame losing to NIU at home. And you can't say that that's a worse or better loss than Ohio State losing to Michigan at home when Michigan is 6-5 when you play them, and you are
Yeah.
literally number two in the country. You've been given the credit to be number two with a loss to the number one team, and bam. And then you've got little old Ole Miss. So Lane Kiffin this week absolutely blasted the college football playoff. He basically said it came down to whatever patch, and other coaches said the same thing. If you look at our resume, if you look at our conference, obviously if you have this or you have that, you're going to get the credit. Alabama and Ole Miss have the same record, essentially. What's the difference between the two? You tell me.
Well, okay. So I'll make the Ole Miss argument here.
That's
Okay,
where I'm going.
both of these teams' best win is Georgia at home, right?
Yep.
Bama beat them by 7. Ole Miss beat them by 18.
I,
They both have another great win over South Carolina. Bama beat them by 2 at home. Ole Miss beat them by 24 in South Carolina.
that's right.
So both the two best wins, Ole Miss has the advantage. They didn't play each other, right? So then, okay, Ole Miss has the advantage so far. So let's go to the losses. Ole Miss lost at home to Kentucky. Okay, that's a bad loss. I think Kentucky ended up being like 4-8 or something. Bad loss at home. Ole Miss
Correct.
lost to who else did they play? They lost to LSU. LSU is 8-4. Not a great loss. And then Ole Miss also lost to Florida, who I believe was seven and
I
five.
think that was the dagger. But
And
Florida
so
has not been relevant but for one time in the last 30 years.
and they got better as the year went on. I honestly I don't think I would have put South Carolina in if I was on the committee. They've won 6 games in a row.
South
They're
Carolina
the hottest team. Yep, they won six
over
games
Ole
in a row
Miss, even though they beat them.
over Ole Miss and Bama. I don't, and that's
Even
the
though
thing is
both
it.
of those teams beat South Carolina.
Yes, I think if those teams replayed each other today, South Carolina would
But
absolutely beat
but
both of
that's the
them
issue with being
because
the
teams
playoff
teams
commit.
get better. Teams get better as the year goes on, and South Carolina has proven that
But here's
by
the
the fact that they've beaten all these different ranked teams. They beat Mizzou, they beat Texas A&M,
okay, that
they just
works
went
in
on the road and beat
baseball.
Clemson.
That works in baseball, but it doesn't work in football where the big picture in football is 12 games. You can't.
And their loss to LSU, they get not only did they get screwed by the refs in that game, which everyone agrees that that's not a hot take. That's everyone agrees with that.
Yeah.
Only did they get screwed by the refs in that game. Their starting quarterback went out in the first half, and so you have to. That's why I don't think the committee watches games. You cannot convince me. And they always say like on the show, whoever their representative is
They,
that goes on. He's like,
they don't watch.
we watch football on. Clearly, you don't.
They just
Clearly,
see
you don't.
highlights. There's
Because
no way. That's a good point. There's no way they watch the games.
Alabama is about to backdoor their way into this playoff when just 2 weeks
What do you mean?
ago
They're
got
in. There's no
they got the.
scenario which
Can I swear? Can I swear? They
that's
got
fucking absolutely yeah.
they got the shit beat out of them by an Oklahoma team that was without their top 5 wide receivers. They were on the
Oh yeah,
practice
yeah,
squad, and they were on a practice squad running back. And Oklahoma ran through them. They destroyed them. They
yeah,
couldn't move the
yeah.
ball either.
I
And
that
you're going to sit here and tell me, and then, okay, you want to talk about common opponents, right? South Carolina went at Oklahoma and played. Guess what the
destroyed.
final score of that? Guess what the final score of
It
that
was
game
like
was? South
61.
Carolina, 35-9.
Not even 60 points
35
scored.
to
Yeah,
9.
between the
That
two
game
teams.
was over in the first quarter. Like that's what I'm saying. I understand
Well,
red
it's
like
clearly a cluster when it comes to deciding who, because I knew this was going to happen, and my point was that whether it's a 2 team, 4 team, or 12 team, there's always going to be somebody left outside, and
I'm
the argument, no matter what the format, is always only going to be about the teams that are left out of the playoff. Ole Miss has an
I'm
argument, but then again, Miami, Miami at 10-2, to me, ACC team that's 10-2, that's not playing in the championship, is not better than the 9-3 team that beat a better team ranked above them. Now, granted, here's what I have to say. So, the funny thing about all of this talk about the cluster and the mix up is you have Tennessee sitting there as literally no one is saying Tennessee doesn't deserve to be there.
right.
Could Tennessee possibly be the absolute best team in the fucking playoff other than Oregon? I think Oregon should. The way they've played with Dylan Gabriel, I mean, the Ducks are usually not favored in the playoffs, but this year they are favored, and I see Tennessee as being the one team, and there's a path to get to a Tennessee Oregon game. The problem is
Yeah.
that Tennessee does not have any of the national attention. The attention goes to
No.
Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, all those teams, and really
Yeah, they've
they're not even talking about Oregon. So I think between
yeah.
SMU and Tennessee, I think Tennessee's going to be the dark horse. At least the narrative or the storyline could be Tennessee.
Yeah, they've kind of been flying under the radar over the last because they were what 7-1, then they lost to Georgia, and
Arkansas,
then
and they
they've
got
won their
lost to
last few,
Arkansas.
and then right they lost to Arkansas, they won a few games, and then lost to Georgia, and so they've kind of been flying under the radar here lately,
They have.
and it's going to be interesting to see how they play. Now, my biggest question, and I want to hear what you would do in this scenario, um, because I don't know. I know what I would do, but I'm not sure if the committee is going to do it. And obviously, if you can tell by this podcast, I despise the committee and everything that they're about. But as does everybody. But
It's
what
a,
I'm going to be interested to see, what I'm going to be interested to see heading into this weekend, and I've had debates with people about this week, because I was talking to somebody the other day, and he was like, "Yeah, well, Ohio State's going to jump up to the 6th seed once if Georgia loses to Texas," and I was like, "Hold on, are you really going to tell me?" And listen, they're going to have they would have a third loss, right? They would be 10-3. But let's remember the only reason they're getting that third loss is because they were able to do something Ohio State wasn't, which was make their conference championship game. So the thing that I'm wondering is this weekend, will teams like Georgia or let's say Clemson beats SMU, right? Or let's say, I don't know, Oregon beats or
Arizona
I guess
State.
yeah, well, that doesn't really apply to what I'm saying. I'm talking about the teams who are
Oh, that are
underdogs in their championship
deep,
game.
but they're deep into the top 10 right now.
Yeah, that are in the playoff right now and are underdogs in their conference championship game. What's going to happen to those teams in the rankings if they lose? What would you do? So right now, right,
Hmm.
Georgia's ranked above Ohio State. If Georgia loses to Texas, would you punish them for losing that game to Texas?
This is where what's called the eye test comes into play. Conference championship games, at least in my lifetime, have always been a gimme game as long as you play well. As long as the score is close, as long as it looks like
Right,
you're a great team and you deserve to be where you're at, the win or the loss doesn't matter. I would say, well, I'll step that back a second. The win matters. If
right.
you
The win matters.
if you win, you're guaranteed to stay where you're at. If you lose, there's no guarantee to stay where you're at. But in most scenarios, at least in the four-team playoff, we saw two teams in the Big 12 one year between I think it was Baylor and
TCU,
TCU. Yeah, that made
and
a
they
difference.
didn't, and they didn't have a conference championship game, which was why they got left out.
Yeah, there was a difference in eye test there, but I think that the Georgia versus okay, Texas is great, Georgia's great. They're both in the top 5. So you can't punish a 2 versus a 5 team. They're going to treat that as if it was a regular season game.
Yeah.
Now, what I would say is that if Georgia loses, they which by the way, a whole different podcast on this, but the fact that Georgia's even like that's
They're not a good team,
well, I
but
know, but the fact that they're
topic for
playing,
another day.
I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
the fact that they're playing is a huge deal. So if they win, that's one scenario where it would be really good for Georgia because now they're 10-3. But I think that a win matters because if you're the higher ranked team and you lose, yeah, absolutely, you could go down a spot. It's not guaranteed, but there's always the if. So conference championships are like, how bad did you? So if Oregon, this is what I'm saying, if Oregon goes in there and beats Penn State, you know, 42-10, we're going to know
Mhm.
just how good Oregon is. But that doesn't
Yeah.
affect the number one whatsoever, and it won't affect Penn State either because Penn State still will be ranked ahead of Ohio State. Unfortunately,
Mm,
because of the number of losses and when they lost and who they lost to. So
maybe, but
Penn State's only loss that doesn't matter is to Ohio State. And
maybe.
but that's just a good thing about the Big Ten. The Big Ten has, you mentioned recruits earlier. Look at the number. If you take Oregon, Penn State, Ohio State, the number of 5-star and 4-star recruits they have is still leading the nation in the top 20
Yep.
universities. So obviously Texas is there. So basically, what it comes down to is where are the 5 and the 4-star recruits playing? They're playing at all the teams minus Indiana and SMU. that and well, matter of fact, Miami for that matter, but they're not, you know, guaranteed to stay in. I think so, which kind of leads me to the next topic. So I was looking at, unless are you have anything else to say?
Well, I just want an answer to my question. If Georgia, what's the
No,
max
I mean,
amount
I
that
mean,
Georgia could lose? I want an answer.
did
What's
I
the
not
max amount
say
that
they
Georgia?
could swap with Ohio State, but Ohio State's not going to move up to number 5. Tennessee would go ahead of Ohio State, I think. Even because neither, well, that's not true either because neither of them are playing. So,
No,
I mean, if
no. What
Georgia, if
let me ask the question one more time. I don't know if you understood me. If Georgia loses by 14 to
to
Texas,
Texas,
would you drop them below Ohio State?
no.
Okay, you wouldn't. So what's the max amount that Georgia could lose by to where you wouldn't drop them below Ohio State?
I don't know that I can answer that definitively, but I can say that if Texas shuts out Georgia, there's a good chance that they could be
Let's say
swapped
that
with
yeah,
Ohio
okay.
State.
Let's say they shut them out 31 nothing. Are you dropping Georgia below Ohio State?
Um, yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
would,
agree.
I would, I would.
I agree. I think all
If they
Georgia
shut them
teams like
out, yeah,
Georgia, all Georgia has to do, in my
or
opinion,
one
is just
score, yeah.
yes. If they keep it where it's a one possession game late in the fourth quarter, then yeah, I think they'll stay put. I
And the
don't think they're
reason
gonna get
the reason being wouldn't be
punished.
because they have 3 losses and Ohio State has 2, because Ohio State didn't have the chance to get a third loss. You
Right.
got to give credit.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, you got to give credit to a
That's what I.
team that.
Yeah.
However, here's the thing: with Tennessee being 10-2, and Georgia and Tennessee being lockstep, I can see that happening. However, the committee would have to explain why they
Yeah.
had three Big Ten teams in the top four.
Sure.
And
Well, and again, it's but they're going to
you
get
see what I'm
seated
saying?
differently.
Like,
Yeah.
then from going forward, the media, the big legacy media, is going to say, well, the committee obviously sees the Big Ten as the super conference, and maybe that is the case. But the bottom line is that Ohio State would move up to number again, it depends on how each championship pans out. So the eye test, like I said in the very beginning, is everything. If Oregon beats Penn State 41-3 or 41-7, and Texas beats Georgia 41-7, or if any team gets shut out, I mean, you're looking at like a pre-playoff before the playoff, which isn't a thing. So you can't really. I think my question would be, just looking at some of the rankings here. Let's say that Arizona State wins the Pac-12,
Big 12.
or yeah, the Big 12. Who do you have from the Big 12? I'm sorry. Who do you have from the SEC that's going out? Because now we just kind of had a conversation about how, oh, this doesn't matter, right? Arizona gets in automatically because they're in the top five. Whether they're a 4 seed or a 5 seed, they'll probably be a 5 seed. That 5 seed has the best route to the next round over 6, 7, 8, 9, right? Even though the 6,
Hmm.
7, 8, 9 are better teams. Is that fair? I This is a problem that I have, and this is the second. I said I got a couple bombs to drop on the playoff committee in regards to their decisions prior to feeling it out. Right, what they should have done the first year was just said, "Hey, 1 through 12 is seeded 1 through 12." The problem is that if Arizona State wins and they're considered top five conference winners, which they will be, because the Mountain West is going to get the number four. So you're going to have, I'm sorry,
Well,
number
if
four.
Boise wins, if Boise wins,
True. So if right, so then you've got, which I never thought the Mountain West would be better than the Big 12 ever. But here,
well, they've got one team, and then the rest is not
well,
great.
they
Yeah.
had two up until a few weeks ago. Um, so I'm going to say that Arizona State gets the number 5 seed. Let's just assume that's going to happen because I think everybody's assuming that.
Well, remember
As
though,
long as they win,
if they're not one of the top four conference championships, they will get reseeded as if they were being ranked against the rest of the field. So Arizona State, well, according to the playoff poll that came out on Tuesday, they would actually be the 12 seed, not the 5 seed.
but then you
They
have
don't automatically get the fifth seed.
right, but then you have Boise State playing Arizona State, respectively.
Well, you would if Arizona State beat the 5 seed.
Wouldn't Boise State be the 5 seed?
No, they'd be the 4. Right now,
No, no.
look at the current
So
bracket.
Notre Dame's going to get the 5 seed.
More than likely,
I'm sorry,
I
the
believe that
sixth seed, right? So it's the 6 seed.
they're yeah they're
So
6 right now. Penn
Notre
State's
Dame's a
5.
lock for the 6 seed, and then you've got. Well, I'm sorry, you're
Or
correct.
5.
You're correct. It's gonna be. It all depends on how they get ranked too.
Nobody's locked for anything right now.
That's
This is
true.
all
That's true.
subject to change.
This is really we're looking too far into the future. So
Yeah,
next week's
just simplify
podcast
this.
we'll be able to talk about the
Right.
actual. But what I'm saying is looking to the near future. I don't see Penn State and Notre Dame swapping spots. So,
So
well,
even if Penn
actually,
State gets
wait a
their butts
minute. Wait a
kicked,
minute. Wait a minute.
so if Oregon beats
This
Penn State 42-10, you're not moving Penn State below Notre Dame.
oh, yeah, this is a
It's tough.
40-minute podcast that really could be 5 hours. So if Penn State gets trolled by Oregon,
Hmm. Yeah.
they could essentially move Notre Dame up.
Right.
Um,
Which is a big deal.
right, because then
That completely changes your path.
completely changes your path for the. So you're right about Arizona State. If Arizona State is the sixth conference, oh no, even if they're the fifth, because the fifth is seeded as well. Only 1 through 4 are automatically seeded 1 through 4, but it's
Yeah.
an automatic bid. So if
Yeah.
Arizona State, and this is the last bomb. So if Arizona State is that automatic bid, that means the 12th ranked team is out,
Correct. Yes. And right
unless
now that
unless they rank Arizona State at number 12, which they can.
yeah. So right now the first team out is Miami. I think they're the first team out.
Yes.
So them. So I think that I don't think Miami stands a chance. What I'm hoping for and I'm praying for, and I don't like Clemson for obvious reasons, but what I'm hoping and praying for, and I don't know if this happens, and if this doesn't happen, then I'm gonna riot in Grapevine, Texas, where they have all these committee meetings. But if Clemson beats SMU, who is ranked what ninth right now, SMU,
8
if Clemson beats SMU, that means Clemson will make the playoff,
based on the
and
conference champion top 5.
because they will be yes, and I don't know if they would be if everything plays if Clemson win, then everything else plays chalk. Then Clemson would probably be the fifth highest ranked conference champion, which
Behind the
would mean they
Mountain West.
probably yeah they'd be behind the Mountain West, behind the Big 12, so they would probably fall. They would probably be the 11 or 12 seed, right? So with all that being said,
Well, no,
I would
it,
hope
it's so the Mountain West and the Big 12 are respectively 10 and 15. That's only the
right, and Clemson is
and
17 right now.
ACC. So yeah, so the highest. So right now it's Big 10 Oregon, SEC
Yep,
Texas. Then it goes Boise State. That's the third. I'm sorry, SMU. That's the
SMU,
third, and then Boise State, and then Arizona State. So
right?
effectively, if SMU loses to Clemson and Boise State wins, that
Yep,
bumps the Mountain West up
to
and the
3.
Big 12 up. But the question is then where do
Yep.
you place the ACC champion against an Arizona State that wins? Now, the scenario that you're just speaking of is what if Boise State, Arizona State, and SMU lose?
I mean that's chaos,
Chaos.
pure chaos, because then you're gonna get
Then Ole Miss gets in,
no, because those 3 teams would be replaced by the teams that beat them,
but not in regards to the CFP ranking.
except for SMU.
So it is absolutely possible that Ole Miss surpasses uh, Miami, even though
No,
they don't play. You don't think so?
no,
You
no, no.
based on resume, you're saying because they're right behind them.
No, but
Okay, okay.
no, based on the fact that Miami's ahead of them right now. You couldn't justify that. There's literally no basis to justify that. I mean, I think Ole Miss is a better team, don't get me wrong, but if they were
Yeah, I
going to
think
rank
Ole
them ahead
Miss
of
is
them,
better than Miami. I think so too.
yeah, I think they would beat them if they
So
played
what
the
if the
game,
college
but
football committee changes their mind between now and next Tuesday?
I mean, I mean, that's not even,
Because my point is then you have
we can't even entertain
then
that
you
kind of a
have two
discussion.
ACC teams in the play. Okay. Well, we'll see.
If Clemson wins, you're going to get 2 ACC teams in the playoffs.
And
It'll be Clemson
Clemson
and SMU.
absolutely could win.
Yeah, the spread's like 2.5.
So if SMU loses, Boise State loses, and Arizona State loses,
Chaos.
the
You're going to get
closest team behind Arizona State is right on the tails, and obviously you have to put in what who would think you would see SMU, Indiana, Iowa State.
yeah, it's crazy. UNLV
I
running
know,
red,
right.
running red.
The Rebels. I mean, they were UNLV was a team that 20 years ago, I would play NCAA football and create a dynasty with because they were the first option available under coaching because they
Yeah,
were so bad.
right. They've gotten better though. They've got some good players over there.
They have. Quick question before we end the podcast. If there was a team this year that you wanted to do good but did not do good, you think about that for a second. And I'm going to say a couple of teams that I had on my mind.
Like
Um,
before the season, I wanted them to be
yeah,
good, and they weren't.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So we know that you're not going to choose Michigan. We know that, right? Um, but I literally wanted when Illinois was 4-0 and they're a rival of my favorite team. When Illinois was 4-0, I thought, this might because of the new conference and their schedule was pretty simple. When they beat Nebraska, and I can't stand Nebraska. There's never a time that I can
Mm.
see myself going, "Oh, I'm so glad Nebraska's winning the Big 10." I'm not going to say it ever. When Illinois beat them, I was like, "Wow, this is great." So Illinois was one of those teams. The other, there's a couple teams, but the one that I chose was West Virginia. I wanted West Virginia to do so well, but when I watched them play Marshall the first week, I thought, man, if they can't do this versus Marshall, right? But they did. They ended up winning. It turns out Marshall was really good. Marshall finished, I think, 8-4. And West Virginia was a team back in the day that they could really put a hurting on you. They had a great head coach. They had a WVU, as the locals call it. I've got family there. You've got family there. The bottom line is West Virginia is one of those teams that at one point in time was a great national team, but they just can't seem to pull it together. So I like that. Illinois did well. They still had a good record for that school. For that school to be where they're at today is a big deal, and they got a decent head coach. I think he's found his spot in Illinois after being at Wisconsin, then going to Arkansas, and now he's at Illinois. I think he might have found his groove, so that would be kind of neat. It would make the Big Ten even better, and then West Virginia. But who is your team?
Well, the easy one to start off with, and we've butted heads on this forever. I have always been on the positive side of Nebraska just because they do have they have a big fan base and they are like a big brand. And I think it would be cool if they were actually good again, but I don't know if that'll ever happen.
They won't be.
Um,
They won't be
a
for many
team
many
that
years.
so this is a team that has been at the top of the sport all year, but they clearly
So
were
it's
not as
not
good.
Nebraska, or your number one team
Well, I have
is
a few. I have
Nebraska.
a few.
So
I
you
have a
can't
few.
narrow it down.
No, no, I don't have second favorite teams. Um, One team that I thought, okay, so I'm gonna say Miami. Now listen, I know they're ranked like 12th or whatever, but clearly they're not a great team. Like they've flirted with a bunch of different losses all year. They clearly were never as good as their record said they were because their two losses are what to Georgia Tech and Syracuse, right?
How sad.
So they were a team that I thought,
They had the
especially
schedule to
looking at
do
their
it.
schedule, exactly looking at their schedule, like there's no reason this team shouldn't go undefeated and make the playoff, and they found a way not to.
That's
And
correct.
I think and I hate to say this, but we saw it when their head coach Mario Cristobal was at Oregon, and we were seeing it now. Something is just off with him, with him as head coach. I don't know what it is, but he can't win games. Like he can't
What
find a way to win close
what
games
years was Cristobal? Do you know off the top of your head?
at
It's
Oregon.
been a while.
Nah, it hasn't been that long. He was there
Or do I have Lanning and Cristobal
from
mixed up? I think I have Lanning and Cristobal mixed up.
yeah. I think this is year three for Lanning.
Yeah, so
I think
so
this is year three for Cristobal and Lanning.
Cristobal was good,
Cristobal,
and Lanning
he was
has
there.
been good. So Oregon's had two good coaches, but
Yeah,
they did have a few down years with Cristobal.
Cristobal was at Oregon, I think, from 2018 or
It,
19 through 2021, I think, and he
But they
never
were
won. I
they
think
were in the
he
playoffs in eight. No, they
mm,
weren't the Ducks, but it was
they
it
never
was
made.
it was
They got
before.
close a
It was
lot.
before. It was before. Yeah, you're right.
They got close a lot. I remember 2019. Utah was actually the team that was best positioned to make the Pac-12 championship,
It
and
was before
Oregon lost the
Cristobal
game.
that they were in the playoffs and got smoked. I think Ohio State smoked them.
That we did. That we
Yeah,
did in
yeah,
the national championship game.
yeah. Like
But
it wasn't
Cristobal
even
wasn't there. Yeah,
wasn't even a game, but it wasn't Cristobal. I was thinking it might have been,
yeah.
but
Cristobal wasn't there. No, no, no. He didn't get there. I don't think till
so
2018 or
you
19.
think
But
Cristobal isn't the coach for Miami, or what are you thinking?
I don't. I mean, we just haven't seen him win consistently yet. Like he always has every single year,
Well, this
and
was
he does this to it.
this was a catapult year for Miami. Last year they were
Yeah,
decent, and everybody thought, well, with Cam Ward, I
right.
still
And
think
Cam Ward and those
I still think Cam Ward,
Ward's incredible.
yeah.
He's incredible. The problem is, like, this is the last year they're gonna like. He's not coming back next
Who
year.
does he have? No, he's going to the draft, yeah, for sure.
Like he'll be a top 10 pick in the NFL draft most likely. So like obviously it wasn't his fault. So it's like if you can't win it when you have a guy like Cam Ward as quarterback, as great as that offense was, their defense was just terrible
Yeah,
all season. And so I don't know where you go from here. Like this had to be the
but
year, and it's
would you
not like
be
they don't
saying
have
the same
talent.
thing if they wouldn't have lost on Saturday? I mean, the loss.
I mean, the loss certainly like gives a little exclamation point to it. But clearly, all season, even in some of the games that they've won, it's been clear that Miami is not
I
a
would say
team that belongs in the elite category.
other than the Ohio State loss, which was the worst loss of the weekend. Miami was the second loss, and not as
Yeah,
surprising, but it still
no,
was surprising.
Miami should never be losing to Syracuse. Like that just should never happen.
And
And the
on,
same, like I would put Miami losing to Syracuse in a similar boat to like to use us as an example, like Ohio State losing to Northwestern. Like it
this
has
year, yeah,
happened, right? Like it has happened. Like Alabama lost to Vanderbilt, right? I would use that same example. Like because of where those teams are, because of how good they recruit, there's no reason they should ever
this
lose
year
to a team,
Northwestern's team, yes,
well, especially this year, right? Like they should never, ever, even in their good years, like they should never lose to those teams just because of how much more purely talented they are.
yeah,
So
athleticism in general. Yeah, you're right,
yeah,
and that really,
should never
I mean,
happen.
obviously, Division 1 college football, you can be a 2 star and play as
Yeah.
well as a 5 star in a game,
Well,
absolutely,
remember,
and sometimes when they come together, that happens. Like, yeah,
right? And Cam Ward, remember, for those who don't know, Cam Ward, he wasn't even rated coming out of high school. He played his first couple of years at Incarnate Word, and then he went to Washington State where he balled out, and obviously he balled out this year at Miami.
yeah.
So
Well, Incarnate
talented
Word
players
is
can come out of
slowly
nowhere.
becoming relevant in the recruiting world anyway.
They're pretty darn good
Yeah,
FCS
in
school.
basketball and football,
Yeah,
and baseball too. But I will also point out that BYU was a disappointment this year for
yeah.
me,
Well,
in
yeah,
regards to being 9-0 and then effectively losing their way out of the playoff. Or I think
yeah,
they were 9-0. And
yeah,
granted, just prior to them losing their first game, the as many would say, the refs helped them win. But for that team to be 9-0 and then go out the way they did with the whole aura around their head coach, and his affinity towards the Hawaiian. I mean, the thing is like it was neat to see that team have such a national picture, because
sure.
I was watching them every week. Literally, once they were like 6-0, I saw them win,
Oh yeah,
and then I was like, oh, it's a miracle referee, not twice but 3 times, make
right.
calls for them to win the game in their own end zone. I mean,
Right.
it might be one of the, I guess, yardage wise, might be one of the greatest comebacks I've ever seen in one drive. They went from their own end zone to the other end zone in like 2 plays.
Yeah.
So a lot of great stories this year. It did not disappoint. I'm not by any stretch of the imagination even going to edit this because the length and the different topics that we've talked about really kind of describes the year. I mean,
Yeah.
truthfully, if you ask me, and I even may make a short of this, but if you ask me what an 11-1 number 2 ranked Ohio State lose to a 6-5 Michigan at the end of the year when it mattered the most for them, I would have said absolutely no way, a
Yeah.
snowball's chance in hell, and it fucking happened. And I'm still in disbelief. Probably a couple years from now, I will look back on this game and say, any given Saturday, how crazy at the horseshoe. Not to dig you, I'm not digging you, but what I'm digging is the fact that this is, you mentioned parity earlier. This is how close it is. So maybe it's time we go with a conference championship type playoff with no at large bids, and then the conferences won't be so big. But with the conferences this big, that'll never happen. What the NCAA needs is a super conference inside the current 135 or 36, whatever the teams are now, and go with a hey, these are our top tier instead of just guessing at the top five conferences. I think I see changes in the future to the college football playoff scheme.
Yeah. Well, then they're only. I heard the other day they're only under contract with this current format for this year and then next year, and then in 2026 they can completely revamp it again. So
So you're saying next year we'll have the same exact format? Okay.
next year will be the same as this year, but then the year after that they can just go up and change it again. So
Well,
we could have
does that
three
matter who you
different playoff
schedule?
formats in 4 years.
That's true. Does that matter who you schedule? I mean, the fact that
Man,
Alabama plays Mercer and Ohio State plays
yeah,
Youngstown State every year, maybe we should go off strength of schedule. But those games mean so little.
yeah.
Eliminate all FCS opponents.
I've always said that.
I mean, that would make the FCS games better too. So,
Yep.
all right. Well, hey, it's if you've stayed with us this long, you're awesome. Make sure to leave a comment. We're going to be back in less than a week. I intend on doing a podcast next Tuesday to basically go over the college football playoff, and then the whole world's just going to break loose. So, hey, thanks for coming on, Jordan. We'll see you
Yep.
next time.
Yes, sir.